What if the school bully picked the wrong girl to mess with? A girl whose connection to the world of the powerful could turn everything upside down. Maya Evans wasn't supposed to be a target. The new girl at Sterling High, she had one simple goal: stay under the radar. It wasn't her first time at a new school, and she'd learned the hard way that blending in was the best way to avoid the chaos that came with high school cliques. But as she stepped off the bus, gripping the straps of her backpack, she couldn't ignore the weight of the stairs. Sterling High was massive, the kind of school where everyone knew their place. It was the perfect arena for someone like Bryce Carter. Bryce was a guy everyone feared, the popular quarterback. Always surrounded by his circle of jocks, his laughter echoing through the hallways as he commanded the attention of everyone around him. A wealthy family, athletic talent, and the right look made him untouchable in the school hierarchy. He had one rule: you either follow him or get crushed. Maya had no intention of playing by his rules. But what Bryce didn't know was that Maya's family wasn't like anyone else's. She wasn't just another shy girl trying to survive her first day. Maya Evans was Vang Dezel's adopted daughter. And that secret? Well, it was about to flip the power dynamics at Sterling High in ways Bryce never saw coming. As Maya walked through the crowded halls of Sterling High, she couldn't help but notice the way Bryce looked at her, sizing her up like she was just another easy victim. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged by her quiet exterior. In fact, Maya had gotten used to moving from school to school, hiding her true identity and blending into the background. But this time something was different. She could feel Bryce's eyes following her every move, sizing her up, testing the waters. When she bumped into him in the hallway, her books tumbling to the floor, she could sense the way the students around them held their breath, waiting for the inevitable showdown. Bryce's confident smirk was unmistakable. The other students stepped aside, watching with wide eyes, knowing exactly what would happen next. But Maya didn't flinch. She didn't break eye contact when he spoke to her, the taunts falling flat. Her mind was somewhere else, far away from his bravado, focused on a far more powerful thing, the secret she held. In today's story, follow Maya Evans, the girl who took down Sterling High's biggest bully without raising a fist. But first, tell me, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. Let's dive into the story. Maya Evans had always been the new kid. The only difference this time was that she wasn't bothered by it. Her family had moved from city to city, school to school, trying to escape a life that wasn't always kind to them. But for Maya, it wasn't about escaping anymore. It was about being invisible. She was used to moving on, starting over. After all, the less people knew about her, the better. Sterling High was like any other school she had ever attended: vast, impersonal, and filled with the typical high school chaos. The halls were alive with the sounds of laughter, loud conversations, and lockers slamming open and shut. It was the first day, and the nervous energy was thick in the air, mixed with a touch of excitement. Maya glanced around, making a mental note of everything she needed to know: where her classes were, who to avoid, and where she could sit in the cafeteria without drawing attention. The school wasn't exactly what she expected. The football team was powerful, the cheerleaders even more so, and the social hierarchies had long been established. But Maya wasn't interested in fitting into any of it. She wasn't here to make friends or to be part of the in crowd. She just wanted to get through the day stay under the radar, and keep her head down. But then she saw him. Bryce Carter. Bryce Carter was everything that Maya had learned to avoid. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dripping with confidence. He leaned against a row of lockers surrounded by his entourage of jocks. His laugh echoed through the hallway, cutting through the noise like a blade. Everyone in the hall seemed to know their place when he was around. His friends doted on him, and his followers clung to his every word. Bryce had that kind of power, the kind that made people either gravitate toward him or shrink in his presence. The swagger in his step was unmistakable. He was the quarterback, the golden boy of Sterling High. His wealthy family, good looks, and athletic prowess made him untouchable. No one dared challenge him. Maya had seen types like him before, the ones who thrived on intimidation, who ruled with power and arrogance, making others feel small in their shadow. And though Maya had learned how to stay invisible, it didn't stop her from recognizing that she was standing in front of the king of this school. But Maya wasn't afraid. Maya made her way down the hallway, minding her own business, when the inevitable happened. As she walked past Bryce, someone bumped into her shoulder, knocking her books out of her hands. It wasn't an accident. The books tumbled to the floor, scattering across the tiles as a few students turned to watch. Bryce's group chuckled, eyes fixed on her like sharks circling their prey. Maya bent down to pick up her books, trying her best to ignore the smirks and giggles around her. Her face burned with embarrassment, but she refused to let it show. She could feel Bryce's presence behind her, his aura of superiority radiating through the air. Well, what do we have here? Bryce's voice was smooth, calm, almost amused. There was an edge to it, though, like a lion toying with its prey. Maya could hear his friends chuckling, waiting for the inevitable taunt. Slowly, Maya stood up, clutching her books. She refused to meet his gaze, knowing exactly what he wanted. She brushed past him without a word, continuing her walk down the hallway. But Bryce wasn't done. "Hey, where's your manners?" Bryce called after her, his voice ringing out in the hallway. "I asked you a question." Maya kept walking. She had played this game before. The best way to deal with people like Bryce was to not engage. She wasn't scared of him, but she wasn't going to let him have the satisfaction of a response either. Ignoring him was the most powerful thing she could do. She felt a tug on her backpack, sharp pull that yanked her back just enough to make her stop. Not hard enough to hurt her, but enough to make it clear that Bryce wasn't going to let this go. Maya slowly turned around, locking eyes with him for the first time. The hallway had gone silent. Even the students who hadn't been paying attention before had now started to watch. Bryce stood there, arms crossed, wearing that infuriating smirk that she had seen on bullies before. But for the first time, Maya didn't flinch. She didn't look away. "You shouldn't have done that," Maya said quietly, her voice calm, steady. Bryce raised an eyebrow and laughed. "And why is that?" Maya didn't answer. Instead, she held his gaze unflinchingly, the quiet power in her demeanor speaking volumes. "Kind of weird, you know that?" Bryce tilted his head, the teasing tone still in his voice. Maya didn't answer. She turned back around and walked away, leaving Bryce and his friends standing there in stunned silence. Bryce wasn't done with her yet. But what he didn't know was that Maya was no ordinary girl, and soon he would find out just how wrong he was to underestimate her. After the incident in the hallway, Bryce Carter's eyes were glued to Maya Evans, and it didn't take long for his amusement to turn into obsession. Maya had unknowingly caught his attention, and for someone like him, that was a dangerous thing. His status at Sterling High depended on everyone respecting him, either out of fear or admiration. And Maya, well, she was different. She didn't fit into his neat little world. So Bryce did what he did best. He targeted her. It started small. In class, he'd mock her for her quiet demeanor, calling her Miss Invisible whenever the teacher asked a question, and Maya answered quietly, yet confidently. His friends would chuckle, nudging each other, sharing knowing glances. Each laugh stung a little more than the last, but Maya didn't react. It wasn't her first time being made the target, and she'd learned long ago that ignoring the bullies was the best way to survive. But for Bryce, ignoring him wasn't an option. His arrogance was too big to be overlooked. At lunch, Maya found herself sitting alone. She always did. It was better that way, away from the chaos, away from the drama. But this time she wasn't left alone for long. Bryce and his entourage of jocks decided to sit nearby, and that's when it began in earnest. He'd toss mocking glances at her from across the cafeteria, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at Miss Quiet over there. I bet she thinks she's too good for us," Bryce would say, his voice dripping with mockery. His friends would laugh, and the cafeteria would buzz with the uncomfortable energy of the school's power dynamics at play. Maya could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. She just kept her eyes on her food, her hands steady as she ate her lunch. Every taunt, every snide remark was met with nothing more than her quiet defiance. The more he taunted, the quieter she became. Bryce was used to getting what he wanted from people: fear, compliance, submission. But Maya wasn't like the others. She wasn't afraid of him. She simply refused to engage. By now, Bryce's antics had become routine. He would poke fun at her whenever he could, calling her weird or weak, trying to provoke a response. But Maya stayed calm, her patience stretching thin but never breaking. Bryce was relentless, and his friends followed suit, taking every opportunity to take jabs at her. "What's the matter, Evans? Cat got your tongue?" One of Bryce's friends sneered one afternoon after English class. He shoved past her in the hallway, purposefully bumping into her. Maya's body barely swayed with the force, but she kept walking. Her eyes focused ahead. It was as if Bryce needed to prove something to himself, constantly testing her with every opportunity, pushing her buttons to see if she would finally snap. But Maya had learned long ago that responding to bullies only gave them power. Bryce didn't understand that. His need for dominance was too strong. One day, as they passed in the hallway, Bryce said something louder than usual. "You're just a freak, Evans. No one's buying the act." Maya didn't even flinch. She kept walking, the echo of his words lingering in the air behind her, but she didn't let it break her stride. Inside, her heart beat steadily, unfazed. She wasn't just some shy girl waiting to be knocked down. She was stronger than he thought, but Bryce was getting irritated. His usual tactics weren't working, and it bothered him more than he cared to admit. Though Maya kept her cool, her mysterious aura didn't go unnoticed. Her stoic patience and refusal to engage with Bryce's taunts left an impression on those around her, including a few students who had begun to whisper in the halls. What made Maya different? Why wasn't she afraid of Bryce? Some people started to wonder, but no one dared to ask her directly. The truth was, Maya was holding something back, a secret that Bryce would never imagine in his wildest dreams. When she wasn't at school, Maya would slip into moments of normalcy, texting someone late at night, her phone hidden from prying eyes. It wasn't just any person she texted. Maya's connection to the world was powerful, and she knew that when the time came, she could rely on that connection. But she kept it all in the background, choosing not to use it for petty revenge. Yet one afternoon, after class, Maya took out her phone, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the screen. She smiled at something the person on the other end had said. But before she could reply, the sound of footsteps approached. It was Bryce, flanked by two of his friends. "Look at Miss Perfect, over here on her phone. Is that how you pass your time when you're not hiding in your little corner?" Bryce mocked, standing just a few feet from her. His eyes burned with a mixture of frustration and curiosity. Maya didn't look up. She didn't even acknowledge him. Instead, she pressed a button on her phone, sending off a quick text with a calmness that Bryce couldn't understand. When she looked up again, her face was unreadable, her gaze steady and unmoved by his presence. The next day, Maya opened her locker to find it trashed. Papers were strewn across the floor, and a few crude pictures of her had been drawn in permanent marker on the inside of the door. The words freak and loser were scrawled across her textbooks. The moment she saw it, Maya didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or cry. She simply stood there for a moment, taking it all in. Bryce was trying to break her. But Maya had been through far worse than this. With a steady breath, she bent down, picking up the scattered papers one by one. She moved slowly, methodically, not giving Bryce the satisfaction of seeing any kind of emotional reaction. She didn't even look at the other students who had gathered around to watch. She just picked up her things, straightened her locker, and shut the door with a soft click dot as she walked away. Bryce stood in the distance, watching her with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. His usual tactics weren't working. Maya was a puzzle he couldn't solve, and that unsettled him more than anything. Maya walked down the hall, her head held high, unfazed by the stunt Bryce had just pulled. He had done his worst, and it hadn't affected her in the slightest. For Bryce, this was just the beginning of the biggest mistake he would ever make. The more he pushed, the deeper he dug his own grave. Maya knew it was only a matter of time before he exposed himself for who he truly was. She didn't need to do a thing. Bryce's own arrogance would be his downfall. Bryce Carter's persistence was starting to feel more like an obsession than a simple case of bullying. Each day, he found a new way to make Maya's life more uncomfortable. He made sure to sit near her in class, throwing whispered insults whenever the teacher wasn't looking. During lunch, he'd loudly recount made-up stories about her, casting her as the weird, invisible girl who didn't belong. And in the hallways, he never passed up an opportunity to bump into her, knock her books from her hands, or make snide remarks just loud enough for the people around them to hear. Despite it all, Maya didn't waver. She didn't flinch. She didn't rise to the bait. Every single taunt bounced off her like water off a duck's back. She maintained the same quiet routine she'd perfected over the years, arriving at school early, staying focused on her classes, and avoiding anyone who might want to stir trouble. When Bryce pushed her, she ignored him. When he mocked her in front of his friends, she remained silent. She never reacted, and that drove Bryce crazy. The more he prodded, the more her silence seemed to infuriate him. It was as if he couldn't understand why she wasn't scared or bothered by him. It was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Maya's lack of response was completely different from anything he'd encountered before. It frustrated him beyond measure. He was used to breaking people, using their fear as a weapon. But Maya? She didn't fear him, and she didn't seem to care about his opinion. Every day he expected her to crack, to cry out for help, or to lash out at him in anger. But none of those things came. She was an enigma, and Bryce found himself drawn to her, like a predator fascinated by prey that refused to show any weakness at home. Maya was a different person. She could leave the bullying behind for a while, focusing on her family, even if it was just a small comfort. After a long day of enduring Bryce's tactics, she would return to her room and talk to the one person who always made her feel like she mattered, her father, Veng. This all had been in her life for as long as she could remember. It wasn't that he treated her like a celebrity's daughter. He treated her like his daughter, full stop. And while she couldn't share the details of what was going on at school, she didn't want him to worry. She found solace in his steady, calming presence on the phone. One evening, after a particularly tense day at school, Maya leaned back in her chair, holding the phone to her ear as she heard Ven's familiar voice on the other end. "You good, kid?" Vang asked, his voice warm, but with a slight edge of concern. He knew his daughter well enough to sense when something was off, even if she wasn't directly saying it. "Yeah, Dad, just ... school stuff. Nothing I can't handle," Maya replied, her tone calm but distant, hiding the frustration she felt. She wasn't one to burden him with the details of her high school troubles. After all, what could Veng Dessel, someone used to the bright lights of Hollywood and the world of action, understand about the cruelty of high school cliques? There was a pause on the other end of the line before Veng spoke again, his voice softer now. "If anything's bothering you, I'm here. Don't carry it alone, all right?" Maya smiled at his words. It was hard not to love a father who cared so much about her, even from miles away. She'd learned long ago that the world could be full of noise and negativity, but it was people like Vang who helped her stay grounded. "Thanks, Dad. I'll be okay," Maya reassured him. A small sense of peace settling over her as she hung up the phone, Maya exhaled slowly. It was strange. She had everything she needed: love, support, and the undeniable feeling that she could conquer anything as long as she didn't let the world drag her down. Even though she couldn't share the specifics, Maya knew that her father's unwavering belief in her gave her the strength to stand tall in the face of everything that came her way. She tucked the phone into her pocket, a sense of calm washing over her as she prepared to face another day of school. No matter how bad it got, she had something Bryce didn't have, someone who truly had her back. As the days went on, Bryce began to feel a gnawing doubt creeping into his mind. Maya was not like the other girls he'd bullied, not even close. While his usual targets would have either cried or fought back by now, Maya seemed untouched by his taunts. The more he poked, the more she withdrew. The silence in her eyes unsettled him, making him question everything he thought he knew about power and control. What was she hiding? There had to be something. Bryce wasn't used to not getting a reaction. He was used to causing people to tremble. Maya didn't tremble. She stood there, unshaken, and that made him wonder, was she pretending? Was there something about her that he didn't know? His curiosity grew stronger with each passing day. Maya was different. She didn't belong in his neat little world of intimidation and manipulation, but something told him that there was more to her than met the eye. And that curiosity, it only made him more determined to break her. He couldn't let her remain an enigma. Maya sat quietly in the back of the classroom, her gaze fixed on the notes in front of her. She had already grown accustomed to the muttered insults and the whispers behind her back, but it didn't matter anymore. It was just noise. The real world, the one that mattered, was waiting for her outside the walls of Sterling High Dot. As she scribbled down a few notes, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her fingers swiping across the screen to check the message. "You good? Let me know if you need anything, kid." Maya smiled, feeling the familiar warmth spread through her chest. It was moments like these that reminded her how lucky she was. No matter what happened at school, she had someone who truly understood her dot as she typed her quick response. Her eyes darted up for a moment. Bryce was standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on her with a mix of frustration and curiosity. The moment their gazes met, Maya couldn't help but notice the tension in his eyes. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. He had no idea what he was dealing with. "I'm fine, Dad. I've got this." She sent the message and locked her phone. No more distractions. She had learned a long time ago that power wasn't about who shouted the loudest or who could make the most noise. It was about knowing when to remain silent, when to wait, and when to strike. Maya Evans had already made her decision. She wasn't going to let Bryce destroy her. She was going to let him destroy himself. The cafeteria was buzzing with the usual chatter as Maya sat alone at the far corner, her head buried in a book. She had already grown used to her solitary lunches, the distant feeling of being both invisible and exposed at the same time. She didn't mind the isolation. It was safer this way. But that day, Bryce Carter had other plans. He walked in with his usual entourage, his group of jocks, all swaggering and laughing as they made their way to the table at the center of the cafeteria. The group was boisterous, the sound of their laughter cutting through the quieter hum of the room. Bryce's eyes immediately locked on Maya, and she could feel the familiar weight of his gaze. This time, however, there was something different in his look, a challenge. Bryce didn't like being ignored, and Maya had made a point of doing just that. Her indifference was starting to eat at him. He needed to break her, to see her crumble the way everyone else did. He wasn't used to being brushed aside. Not by someone like her. He made his move, walking over to her table with the calculated ease of someone who was always in control. Bryce loomed over her, his shadow casting over the pages of her book. His friends circled around, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. "Nice little corner you've got here," he said, the sarcasm in his voice cutting through the air. "Hiding out, huh? Too scared to sit with anyone?" Maya didn't look up. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she kept her focus on the book, as if he wasn't there at all. Bryce smirked, unfazed by her silence. He took a step forward, leaning in closer, trying to close the distance. "I bet you think you're better than everyone else, don't you? All high and mighty, acting like you're above it all." Still, Maya said nothing. She felt the heat of his presence, but it didn't stir anything inside her. She wasn't afraid of him, and she certainly wasn't going to engage in his petty games. Bryce's smirk faltered, and the first crack in his confidence appeared. His friends snickered, unsure how to proceed when their leader wasn't getting the reaction he wanted. But Bryce wasn't ready to let it go. His pride was on the line. In an exaggerated motion, he shoved Maya's book to the side, knocking it off the table. Her eyes slowly lifted to meet his, but still there was no sign of fear. "That's it. I've had enough," he spat, leaning in closer, his breath hot against her ear. "Time to stop pretending you're above it all." But this time Maya did something completely different. Without a word, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and calmly pressed a button. The action was so simple, so deliberate, it caught everyone off guard. The tension in the air shifted as Maya's cool composure contrasted with Bryce's growing frustration. A deep roar filled the air, loud, powerful, unmistakable. The students around them turned, their whispers rising as they watched the scene unfold. From outside, the sound of an engine grew louder, the rumble sending a shockwave through the cafeteria. And then, as if on cue, a black Dodge Charger Hellcat came into view, its engine growling as it pulled into the parking lot. The car's sleek, intimidating frame gleamed under the overhead lights, an embodiment of raw power. The windows rolled down, and the first person Bryce saw behind the wheel wasn't just anyone. It was Veng Dezel. Bryce froze. The car door swung open, and Veng Dezel stepped out of the Dodge Charger with the kind of presence that made the ground feel like it was shaking. His signature calm yet powerful aura radiated across the parking lot, and the buzz in the cafeteria immediately turned into a murmur. Veng wasn't just any celebrity. He was an icon, a figure larger than life. He was a man who carried weight in any room, a force of nature that could command respect without uttering a word. As he stood there, surveying the crowd, all eyes turned to Maya, who remained unfazed by the chaos unfolding around her. Bryce's eyes widened as the realization hit him. Maya hadn't just been ignoring him for the fun of it. She hadn't been some shy girl trying to escape the attention. She wasn't even close to being the kind of person he could bully. She was something entirely different. She was someone with power, a power that Bryce hadn't even begun to comprehend. The crowd seemed to part as Veng made his way to the entrance, and for a moment all Bryce could do was stare, his jaw slightly agape. For the first time in his life, Bryce felt small. This wasn't a world he knew how to navigate. His mind raced as he processed what was happening. Maya, quiet, reserved Maya, wasn't some easy target for his bullying. She was someone connected to a world far beyond his, a world of influence and power that dwarfed anything he could ever dream of. The air around them grew thick with the shock of the moment, and Bryce's bravado began to falter. His chest tightened, and for once he didn't know what to do. He had always been the one who made people uncomfortable, the one who controlled every situation. But now he was the one who felt vulnerable. Maya's small smile, barely perceptible, told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't just some random girl who could be pushed around. She was someone who had been silently biding her time, watching as he made a fool of himself. Maya slowly turned to face Bryce, her eyes locking with his. She didn't need to say much. Her words carried weight without needing to shout. "Still think I'm just some random girl?" she asked softly, the smile still on her lips. Bryce blinked, momentarily stunned into silence. The realization hit him like a freight train, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of his arrogance crashing down on him. The confidence that had fueled his bullying suddenly seemed hollow, exposed for what it truly was, nothing more than a facade. Maya's calm demeanor, her refusal to react to his taunts, had been a calculated move. She had never been the target in this game. She had been the one playing it from the start. And now, in this moment, Maya had control, not just of Bryce, but of the entire situation. Bryce's smirk faltered, replaced by uncertainty. His friends stood behind him, exchanging nervous glances, unsure if they should intervene. But none of them dared speak up. Maya turned her gaze away from Bryce, her smile fading as she calmly walked past him, heading towards the door where Veng stood waiting. For the first time, Bryce felt powerless. He had underestimated her, and now Maya Evans had turned the tables, making him realize that he was just another player in a game far bigger than anything he could ever control. As she passed him, Maya's voice echoed just loud enough for Bryce to hear. "You're not the one in control here, Bryce." And that was it. No more words were needed. Maya had already won. This chapter marks a turning point in the story, where Maya's hidden strength is revealed, and Bryce is forced to confront the fact that he's dealing with someone far beyond his league. The arrival of Veng Dezel is the catalyst that shifts the power dynamics, leaving Bryce stunned and questioning everything he thought he knew about power. Maya's quiet strength has been her greatest weapon, and now she's in control. After the incident in the parking lot with Veng Dezel, Bryce Carter's pride took a serious hit. He had never been so thoroughly embarrassed in front of his friends, his school, and, worst of all, Maya. He couldn't understand why she hadn't been affected by his usual tactics. Why hadn't she cracked? Maya's silence was unnerving. Her lack of fear a direct challenge to everything he believed about power. He was supposed to be the king of Sterling High, but Maya had humiliated him with nothing more than a phone call. Humiliation was not something Bryce Carter could stand for. So he did what he always did when his control was threatened. He retaliated. The next day, during lunch, he gathered his friends in secret. He whispered orders, telling them to take care of Maya's locker. A few of his goons would sneak into the hallway and vandalize it again, this time pushing things further. He wanted to break her spirit. He wanted her to feel as small as he had felt the day Veng Dezel showed up. By the time the final bell rang and students rushed out of class, Maya was still in the library, oblivious to Bryce's plot. But by the time she made her way to her locker, she would see the damage. They had scribbled crude, offensive messages in permanent marker. Drawings of Maya with demeaning captions were smeared across her books. Her personal belongings were scattered across the floor in a deliberate mess, just waiting for her to break down. Bryce waited by the lockers, a smug expression on his face. His friends stood a few feet behind him, trying their best not to make eye contact with the scene they had created. They all knew what was coming. They had seen how Bryce operated, how he loved to see people crumble under the weight of his insults. But what they didn't expect was Maya's reaction. Maya stood at the entrance of the hallway, her eyes immediately falling on the mess in front of her. There it was, exactly what she'd expected. A smear of harsh words, a visual assault designed to humiliate her, But Maya didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She didn't even sigh in frustration. Instead, she walked calmly towards her locker, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway as students stopped to watch the unfolding drama. She didn't acknowledge Bryce. She didn't even spare him a glance. Without missing a beat, Maya bent down and began picking up her books from the floor, stacking them one by one. The school bell rang, but Maya remained focused on the task at hand tidying the mess that had been intentionally left for her to clean up. The students who had been watching began to murmur, their eyes flicking from Maya to Bryce. Bryce's friends shifted uneasily. This wasn't the reaction they were expecting. They had hoped for tears, or at the very least, a reaction anything that would show them that Maya had been shaken. But there was nothing. Maya picked up the last of the scattered books and straightened the disheveled locker. She didn't speak. She didn't make a scene. She simply performed the act of restoring order without uttering a single word, as if the graffiti, the taunts, and the humiliation didn't matter at all. Bryce watched, his fury building with every second that passed. The silence from Maya, her refusal to engage in the mess he had created, only made him angrier. He had expected her to crumble, but she was giving him nothing. No anger, no tears, no fear. She was just unfazed. When Maya finally closed her locker and stood up, she faced Bryce for the first time. Her expression was calm, almost too calm. Her eyes met his, and there was no sign of fear or resentment. Only quiet defiance. Without a word, she turned and walked away. Bryce stood there, seething with frustration. His friends were silent, unsure of what to say or do. Maya's composure was a slap in the face, a challenge he couldn't seem to answer. He had made his move. He had tried to break her, and yet here she was, walking away without even blinking. What happened in the hallway didn't stay in the hallway. Word spread quickly. By the time Maya got to her next class, whispers had already started to spread through Sterling High. Students who had witnessed the scene began talking. Some were impressed by her strength. Others were shocked by the way she had handled it. But all of them had one thing in common. They respected her dot. No one had ever dared stand up to Bryce like that, not without at least putting up a fight. But Maya didn't need to fight. She didn't need to raise her voice or challenge him head-on. She had simply refused to let him have the satisfaction of seeing her react. And in doing so, she had taken control of the narrative. Bryce's usual tactics, the insults, the humiliation, the show of power had fallen flat. His friends were starting to look at him differently. Some even started to step back, not wanting to be associated with his antics. Bryce had tried to push Maya into a corner, but instead she had turned the tables, and the message was clear. You can't break me. The respect that Maya had earned in that moment wasn't loud or in your face. It was quiet. It was understated, but it was powerful. She had commanded it simply by refusing to engage in Bryce's theatrics. As Maya walked down the hall to her next class, she could feel the shift. People no longer saw her as the shy, quiet girl. She was someone who had power in her silence, someone who refused to be manipulated by a bully. And for the first time, Maya wasn't just blending in anymore. She was someone to watch. Bryce, on the other hand, stood at the lockers, still fuming. The students who had once laughed at his jokes now whispered behind his back. His dominance over the school, which had been so absolute, was beginning to crack. The throne he had built for himself wasn't as solid as he thought. For the first time, Bryce realized he wasn't the one in control anymore, and that realization was going to haunt him. Maya had learned long ago that sometimes the most effective weapon wasn't one you wielded in the heat of the moment. It was one you gathered in silence, patiently building a case over time. She didn't need to engage Bryce directly. He was already digging his own grave with every cruel joke, every nasty remark he sent to his friends, and every post he uploaded to social media. At first, Maya simply listened and observed. She sat in the back of classes, kept her head down, and watched the patterns. She watched how Bryce treated people, how he belittled them when he thought no one was listening, how he sent derogatory messages to his friends, how he mocked the students who didn't fit into his narrow view of what was acceptable. And she took note of everything. It was easy to find the evidence. Bryce, in all his arrogance, thought he was untouchable. He freely texted his friends about their classmates, making jokes about the people he considered inferior. His messages were laced with racism, sexism, and casual cruelty, as if he believed there would be no consequences for his actions. Maya collected screenshots, dozens of them capturing his true nature in full, uncensored glory. The more she gathered, the more she realized just how vile Bryce really was. His words weren't just hurtful, they were dangerous, spreading toxicity and hatred across the school. Maya wasn't just collecting evidence to defend herself. She was preparing to bring down the empire he had built on fear and intimidation. She knew that the time for patience was almost over. She was no longer willing to let Bryce go on pretending to be the charming, untouchable golden boy. The truth was going to come out, and she was going to be the one to make sure everyone saw who Bryce Carter truly was. The plan had been forming in the back of Maya's mind for weeks. Every piece of evidence she had gathered, every screenshot of Bryce's vile comments, was carefully stored on her phone. She didn't let anyone see them, not her classmates, not her teachers, no one. But it wasn't about hoarding the evidence. It was about making sure the moment Bryce's empire crumbled would come at the right time. And now the time had arrived. Maya knew that exposing Bryce's true nature wasn't about getting revenge. It was about showing the world who he really was. So on a quiet Friday afternoon, as the school day was winding down, Maya sat at the back of her final class, her phone in hand. She opened the folder where she had stored Bryce's darkest secrets. With a steady hand, she began to send the screenshots. One by one, she emailed the incriminating messages to every student, every teacher, every faculty member at Sterling High. She included the entire student body on the email list, ensuring that no one would escape the fallout. The subject line read simply, Bryce Carter, the truth. Maya didn't just send the messages. She attached the posts, the private messages, the racial slurs, the sexist remarks, everything that Bryce had ever thought he could get away with. She knew that no one would be able to ignore this, not even Bryce's closest friends. They would all know what kind of person he truly was. As she hit send, she leaned back in her chair, her expression calm. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel satisfaction. She just felt the quiet weight of justice being served. Bryce's reign of terror was about to come to an end. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By the time the school bell rang, signaling the end of the day, the chaos had already started. Students were whispering in the hallways, some looking at their phones in disbelief. Bryce's friends were starting to look uncomfortable. The air at Sterling High was thick with tension as the truth spread like wildfire. By the time Bryce made his way to his locker, he was already the subject of the school's gossip. Students were no longer looking at him with admiration. Instead, they were looking at him with disgust. Whispers filled the hallways, and Bryce could feel the weight of their gazes on him. When he opened his locker, he found a sea of messages flooding in, students confronting him, teachers sending him disappointed texts, and a flood of comments from classmates and friends calling him out on his behavior. His phone buzzed relentlessly as people started sharing their reactions to the exposed screenshots. His popular status, his once untouchable image, was rapidly deteriorating. Bryce stood frozen in the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest as he read through the messages. It was all there, the truth he had tried so hard to keep hidden. His dirty secrets were now public knowledge. His friends, the ones who had once laughed at his jokes, now distanced themselves from him. They couldn't stand by him anymore, not when the evidence was so clear. "Dude, what the hell?" One of his closest friends muttered, his face pale with shock. "I didn't know. I didn't think you." Bryce didn't wait for him to finish. He slammed his locker shut and stormed out of the building, his pride shattered, his social circle crumbling. He was no longer the king of Sterling High. He was a pariah, an outcast. The weight of his arrogance and cruelty was finally crashing down on him. And Bryce realized, too late, that Maya Evans had been the one to bring him down. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a confrontation. It was patience, silence, and the truth that destroyed him. It was a strange feeling, walking through the halls of Sterling High for the first time without the weight of Bryce Carter's presence hanging over her. Maya's head was held high, her steps steady and purposeful. She could feel the eyes on her as she passed through the crowded corridors, but this time there was no fear, no uncertainty. There was only respect. She had done what no one else dared to do. She had brought down Thegai, who had ruled these halls with fear. Maya had never raised a fist. She had never shouted in or frustration. Her victory hadn't come through force, but through something far more powerful: patience, intelligence, and an unwavering belief that time would reveal the truth. Bryce had tried to break her and push her into submission, but all he had done was expose his own dark nature, and in doing so he had destroyed himself. Now, as Maya walked through the school, she wasn't the quiet, invisible girl she had once been. She was someone who commanded attention, not because of her words or actions, but because of her ability to remain calm in the face of adversity. She had won without ever raising her voice, without ever resorting to violence. She had dismantled Bryce's reign with a single quiet strategy, by letting him destroy himself. The hallways felt different now. Maya didn't feel like an outsider anymore. She had earned her place in Sterling High, not by conforming to the school's hierarchy, but by showing everyone that strength came in many forms, and the quietest ones were often the most powerful. Bryce Carter, once the undisputed king of Sterling High, could do nothing but watch as his world crumbled. It didn't happen all at once. At first, he still tried to salvage his reputation. He spoke to his former friends, trying to convince them that Maya had played dirty, that she had ruined him for no reason. But they didn't listen. They didn't care anymore. His former supporters, those who'd once laughed at his jokes, followed his lead, and been afraid to stand up to him, now avoided him at all costs. Everywhere he went, students whispered behind his back. Some mocked him openly, others simply turned their backs. Teachers gave him the cold shoulder, and his social circle slowly but surely disappeared. He no longer had the power he once did. No one feared him anymore, and without that fear, his presence had become meaningless. The worst part, Bryce realized, was that he had no one left. The power he had clung to for so long, his wealth, his popularity, his physicality, had all evaporated. It was like a mask had been ripped off, exposing him for what he truly was, a bully with nothing to back up his bravado. Bryce had always assumed he would be the one to control the narrative, the one to dominate the story. But Maya had flipped the script, and now the story was all about him, the fall of the arrogant bully who had thought he was untouchable. His reputation had gone from untouchable to irrelevant in a matter of weeks. As Maya sat in the quiet of her room later that evening, reflecting on the events that had unfolded, she couldn't help but smile. It hadn't been easy. The loneliness, the uncertainty, the frustration, it had all been worth it. She had stayed true to herself, never losing her sense of who she was. And now she had a new understanding of what true strength meant. Her patience had been her greatest weapon. Her ability to wait for the right moment to let Bryce's own arrogance and cruelty do the work for her had proven more powerful than any confrontation she could have initiated. She hadn't needed to stoop to his level or fight back in the ways he had expected. Instead, she had let time and truth take their course. It was a hard lesson, but it was one she would carry with her for the rest of her life, that sometimes the quietest ones were the ones you should fear the most. Maya thought about her family, about her adopted father, Vang Dezel. She had never needed to rely on his name or his fame to win this battle, but his unwavering belief in her, his support, had always given her the strength to stand tall when others might have faltered. Maya had learned that strength didn't always need to be loud. It could be quiet, subtle, and steady, like the calm before a storm. Her journey at Sterling High had only just begun. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But Maya was ready. She knew now that the quietest girl in the room could hold the most power. Bryce had tried to break her, and in the end it was his own actions that had broken him. He had underestimated her, and that mistake had cost him everything. Maya stood up, walked to her window, and looked out at the world beyond. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she truly belonged. Her time at Sterling High had come full circle, and though Bryce's reign was over, Maya's journey was only just beginning. And there you have it, Maya's quiet but powerful victory. Sometimes strength comes in the form of patience, and Maya showed us that. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales. And hey, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of Maya's journey? Drop your comments below and tell me where you're tuning in from. See you next time. The next few days at Sterling High were nothing short of chaotic for Bryce. The moment the email had gone out, his world had unraveled. He had always been the king of the school, the guy everyone looked up to, the one who commanded respect. But now, as Maya walked through the hallways, it was clear that the tables had turned. Maya was no longer the shy, quiet girl she'd been at the beginning of the year. She was walking with a quiet confidence, her demeanor unshaken by the whispers that followed her down the hall. Students, teachers, even the most popular kids now looked at her with respect. There was no more bullying, no more taunts. In fact, a few of the students who had once been too scared to even glance in her direction were now giving her nods of approval, smiles, and some even whispered words of support. Maya had won. Meanwhile, Bryce could feel the ground beneath him cracking. It started with his friends distancing themselves from him. Then came the comments on social media, the likes, the shares, the memes. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages calling him out. The people he had once called friends now echoing his cruelest words back at him in the harshest light. His popularity had crumbled, and with it, the power he had once held so tightly. He tried to put on a brave face, but it wasn't working. Everywhere he went, there were whispers, students pointing fingers, whispering behind his back. His friends no longer walked with him in the halls. Teachers barely looked him in the eye. His reputation was in ruins, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. Desperation began to take root in Bryce's chest, a bitter, gnawing feeling. He could no longer command the respect he was used to. He had been reduced to a laughingstock, and he hated it. The realization hit him harder than anything else. Maya had destroyed him. He had to do something to fix this, to regain control. But he knew deep down that the more he tried to fight back, the deeper he was digging his own hole. The truth had come out, and there was no way to cover it up now. Maya had played the game better than he ever could have. Bryce couldn't take it any longer. The whispers, the cold stares, he couldn't go on like this. He needed answers, and he needed them now. There was only one person he could turn to for those answers. He found her in the hallway. As usual, Maya, walking calmly to class, her books tucked under her arm. She didn't even seem to notice him at first, and for a moment Bryce almost hesitated. The power had shifted, and she was no longer the girl he could easily push around. But his pride couldn't stand it any longer. He was done being humiliated. He needed to confront her. Maya? He snapped, his voice louder than necessary, drawing the attention of nearby students. I need to know something. Maya turned to face him, her expression calm, composed. She wasn't surprised by his outburst. In fact, she had been expecting it. He was desperate. She could see it in the way his eyes flickered, in the tightness of his jaw. What's your problem, Bryce? Maya asked, her voice steady but quiet. Why are you still here? Bryce's frustration boiled over. He stepped toward her, closing the distance between them, his anger rising. Why didn't you expose me sooner? He demanded, his words coming out in a sharp, almost accusing tone. You had all this crap on me, and you waited until the last possible moment to destroy me. Why? Maya didn't flinch. She didn't move. She simply looked at him, her gaze steady, unwavering. Because I didn't need to, she said softly, her voice low but firm. I let you destroy yourself, Bryce. You did all the work for me. Bryce's brow furrowed, confusion and anger battling for dominance on his face. What do you mean by that? Maya took a slow, deliberate step back, giving him space, but she didn't break eye contact. You think I exposed you to get back at you? No, Bryce, you exposed yourself. I didn't have to do a thing. You were so busy trying to put everyone else down, so busy trying to maintain your little kingdom, that you didn't even see it. You never saw it coming, did you? Bryce's mouth went dry, and for a moment he couldn't find the words. He opened his mouth, trying to formulate a response, but nothing came. The truth Maya had spoken hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't the one who destroyed me. He had destroyed himself. His arrogance, his cruelty, his need to tear others down, it had all been his undoing. Maya continued, her voice still calm, still controlled. You had everything, Bryce. You had the popularity, the power, the respect, but none of it was real. It was all built on lies and fear. I just waited for the right moment to let the truth take its course. And you made sure it worked out for me. You couldn't keep your mouth shut, could you? Bryce didn't have a response. He wanted to lash out, to shout at her, to do anything to regain control. But something had shifted. The power he had once held was slipping through his fingers, and for the first time he wasn't in control of the situation. I've watched you for weeks. Bryce, Maya said, her tone now almost pitying. You think you can break people? You think you can control everything around you with your words? You can't. People are smarter than you think. And I was just waiting for the moment when you'd finally show your true self. And you did. You really did. Bryce stood there, in the middle of the hallway, the weight of Maya's words sinking in. His arrogance, his cruelty, all of it had come crashing down around him, and he had no one to blame but himself. He had spent so much time trying to maintain control over others, trying to keep his crown, that he had completely lost sight of the bigger picture. Maya wasn't just a girl to push around. She was someone who understood the value of patience, of letting people destroy themselves without lifting a finger, and Bryce had been the perfect target. The students who had been watching, who had gathered to witness this confrontation, began to murmur amongst themselves. The shift was palpable. Bryce was no longer the king of Sterling High. He was just another student, exposed for the world to see. Maya turned to walk away, her calm composure in place as she moved past Bryce. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Bryce watched her leave, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. He had no one left. His friends had turned their backs on him. His status had evaporated, replaced with shame and isolation. And as he stood there, alone in the middle of the hallway, Bryce realized that Maya Evans had won not through force, but through intelligence and patience, and for the first time in his life he understood what it meant to lose control. The days following Bryce's public fall from grace were tense. Everywhere Maya went, she could feel the shift. Whispers still echoed in the hallways, but this time they weren't about her. Bryce, the once untouchable king of Sterling High, had lost his throne. His friends had abandoned him, his reputation shattered, and he was now the subject of ridicule and disdain. But Maya wasn't finished, as satisfying as it was Bryce squirm. Maya knew that she couldn't let him get away with everything. His actions had caused harm to more than just her. He had mocked and belittled students from every walk of life, teachers, and even the school staff. His offensive comments weren't just about her, they were about everyone who didn't fit into his narrow view of the world. And Maya had the proof. She had been quietly gathering more screenshots messages Bryce had sent about students of different backgrounds, comments about his teachers, and cruel remarks about people who were different from him. It wasn't just racism or sexism. It was a reflection of everything wrong with Bryce's worldview. He had thought he could say whatever he wanted, that no one would challenge him. But now Maya had the ultimate evidence. With a steady hand, She compiled the new screenshots, dozens of damning conversations that exposed Bryce's true character even more thoroughly than before. These messages were even worse than the first batch. They included hurtful and offensive comments about students' races, backgrounds, and religious beliefs. He had insulted teachers, mocking their intelligence and personal struggles. And this time, Maya wasn't just sending these screenshots to students. She sent them directly to the school's administration, every principal, every teacher, every staff member. She wasn't just exposing Bryce to his peers anymore. She was showing the people in power exactly what kind of person they had been allowing to walk their halls unchecked. Bryce had pushed everyone away with his arrogance, but Maya had kept her composure. And now the final blow would be dealt, not by her actions, but by the truth. The emails went out. And just like the last time, the ripple effect was immediate. The student body of Sterling High was divided, but the scales were tipping in Maya's favor. Some of Bryce's remaining supporters, those who had stood by him out of fear or misplaced loyalty, tried to salvage his reputation. But the majority of students began to distance themselves from him, now fully aware of his true nature. The students who had once laughed along with his cruel jokes now realized how toxic his presence had been. They turned their backs on him, disillusioned by the realization that they had been complicit in his behavior by doing nothing to stop it. In contrast, Maya's stature within the school grew. She was no longer the quiet girl who walked the halls in solitude. She was the girl who had outsmarted the school bully, the girl who had stood firm in the face of ridicule and hate, the girl who had brought down an entire empire with nothing more than her patience and resolve. Even those who had once stayed neutral, unsure of Maya's quiet strength, now admired her. They saw her as the one who had actually demonstrated true strength, not through violence or intimidation, but through quiet defiance and an unshakable belief in herself. Maya had become a symbol dot in the cafeteria. Students who had previously avoided Maya approached her with respect, even if it was just to offer a silent nod of approval. Teachers began to treat her differently, too. Maya wasn't just a passive bystander anymore. She was someone who had taken control of her situation and forced the world to acknowledge the truth. But Bryce? He had nowhere to turn. He was alone. Bryce's isolation was now complete. No one was willing to stand by him, not his friends, not his peers, and certainly not the faculty. He had tried to salvage his reputation by playing the victim, claiming that Maya had ruined him, that she was out to get him. But no one was listening anymore. The evidence spoke for itself, and his own words had sealed his fate. Maya, however, continued with her life. She didn't seek out confrontation. She didn't have to. Bryce was crumbling without any effort on her part. Every step he took toward trying to reclaim his position was another step toward the bottom. One afternoon, as Maya walked through the hallway, she passed by Bryce. He was standing by his locker, his shoulders slumped, his head down. He didn't even look at her this time. Maya walked past him, her pace measured and confident, her eyes straight ahead. It was a simple moment, but it was profound. For the first time since the beginning of the school year, Maya wasn't walking in the shadow of Bryce Carter's presence. She wasn't looking over her shoulder, wondering when the next taunt or insult would come. Bryce's posture said it all. His days of dominance were over. The halls that he had once ruled were no longer his. Maya walked by him without breaking her stride. She didn't need to say anything, no smug remark, no taunting comment. She knew exactly what had happened. Bryce had fallen, and for the first time he knew it too.